Hello, everyone. This is Reverend Dr. Roger Paul, and tonight we are going to study paper 175 from the Urantia Book, The Last Temple Discourse. And that starts on page 1905 in the original Urantia Book, or paper 175-11 and all the rest of it. So let's say a quick prayer and we'll get started. Father, thank you for allowing us to come and study this wonderful revelation. We thank you for the opportunity to serve you tonight and that we might spread this word to others, that they might learn from this and learn how much you love us and teach us how to do your will in our lives. We thank you. We give you the praise in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Uh-oh.
Well, that's not it. Here we go. Okay. Paper 175, The Last Temple Discourse. And I'm going to warn y'all before we get started tonight, this is the last time that Jesus really addresses the whole Sanhedrin, and he lays it to them in this paper. I mean, he tells them the way it is, so it's pretty direct. Shortly after 2 o'clock on this Tuesday afternoon, Jesus, accompanied by 11 apostles, Joseph of Arimathea, the 30 Greeks, and certain other disciples, arrived at the temple and began the delivery of his last address in the courts of the sacred edifice. The discourse was intended to be his last appeal to the Jewish people and the final indictment of his vehement enemies and would-be destroyers, the scribes, Pharisees, and Sadducees, and the chief rulers of Israel. Throughout the forenoon, the various groups have had an opportunity to question Jesus. This afternoon, no one asked him a question. So all of his enemies, plus those that were faithful to him, were here at this meeting, and that's Jerusalem, and the old Jerusalem. All right, let's look here. Okay. Diane, would you take the first one?
Okay. As the master began to speak, the temple court was quiet and orderly. The money changers and the merchandisers had not dared again to enter the temple, since Jesus and the aroused multitude had driven them out the previous day. Before beginning the discourse, Jesus tenderly looked down upon this audience, which was so soon to hear his farewell public address of mercy to mankind, coupled with his last denunciation of the false teachers and the bigoted rulers of the Jews.
All right. So everyone was there. All right. We're going to go through these slides tonight fairly fast because Jesus is teaching in this consistently through this whole first part of this paper. So I don't want to get too bogged down in what he's saying because I want y'all to get the gist of his presentation together, and I don't want to interrupt it a whole lot. So, Millie, would you take the next one, please?
Yes. This long time have I been with you, going up and down in the land, proclaiming the Father's love for the children of men, and many have seen the light and, by faith, have entered into the kingdom of heaven. In connection with this teaching and preaching, the Father has done many wonderful works, even to the resurrection of the dead. Many sick and afflicted have been made whole because they believed. But all of this proclamation of truth and healing of disease has not opened the eyes of those who refuse to see the light, those who are determined to reject the gospel of the kingdom.
So he's telling them he's done just about everything he could, right, to convince him of who he was.
Hey, Roger.
Hi, Tim.
Hey, Tim.
Hey, Diane. How you doing? How you doing, Millie and Bill?
Glad to see you with us.
Hey, Tim.
Doing great.
Got a full crew tonight. All right.
Glad to have you with us tonight, Tim.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. It's so glad to be here. It's been busy.
We hope your family's doing a little better.
Yeah, she's, improving.
Good. Stephen, would you take the next one, please?
Okay. In every manner consistent with doing my Father's will, I and my apostles have done our utmost to live in peace with our brethren. to conform with the reasonable requirements of the laws of Moses and the traditions of Israel. We have persistently sought peace, but the leaders of Israel will not have it. By rejecting the truth of God and the light of heaven, they are aligning themselves on the side of error and darkness. There cannot be peace between light and darkness, between life and death, between truth and error.
So he's basically telling them, you're either with me or you're against me, isn't he? And even those who are supposed to be representing God are the ones he's talking about being with him or against him, if you think about it, right? Because he's talking about the chief priests and leaders. All right.
Right.
All right. Bill, would you take the next one, please?
Sure. Many of you have dared to believe my teaching and have already entered into the joy and liberty of the consciousness of sonship with God. And you will bear me witness that I have offered this same sonship with God to all the Jewish nations, even to these very men who now seek my destruction. And even now would my Father receive these blinded teachers and these hypocritical leaders if they would only turn to him and accept his mercy. Even now, it is not too late for this people to receive the word of heaven and to welcome the Son of Man.
So he's starting out trying to still bring him in, isn't he? He's still telling them you can still decide to follow God, right? It's not too late. But he changes the tone of this pretty quickly here in the next few paragraphs. All right.
Right.
Rodney, would you take the next one, please?
My Father has long dealt in mercy with his people. Generation after generation have we sent our prophets to teach and warn them. And generation after generation have they killed these heaven-sent teachers. And now do your willful high priests and stubborn rulers go right on doing this same thing. As Herod brought about the death of John, you likewise now make ready to destroy the Son of Man.
So he's calling them out, isn't he? He's saying you're fixing to do the same thing that your ancestor did by killing the prophets, right? That's about as plain as you can say it. All right. Tim, would you take the next one, please?
As long as there is a chance that the Jews will turn to my Father and seek salvation, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob will keep his hands of mercy outstretched toward you. But when you have once filled up your cup of impotence, and when once you have finally rejected my Father's mercy, this nation will be left to its own counsels, and it shall speedily come to an inglorious end. This people was called to become the light of the world, to show forth the spiritual glory of a God-knowing race, but you have so far departed from the fulfillment of your divine privileges that your leaders are about to commit the supreme folly of all the ages, and that they are on the verge of finally rejecting the gift of God to all men and for all ages, the revelation of the love of the Father in heaven for all of his creatures on earth. Wow.
Now remember, Jesus came into the world as a Jew, right? He was brought up as a Jew. And the Jewish people were the light bearers of the concept of God up to that point, right? So what he's telling them is by rejecting the Son of God, they're fixing to lose their rightful place as the torchbearers of the concept of God. And that torch will be passed to whom? The Gentiles.
The Gentiles.
That's right. And all those who believe, right? So that's what he's trying to tell them, and they're still not listening.
So Gentiles meaning non-Jewish people.
Non-Jewish people, that's right. All non-Jewish people. Okay. I'm going to skip. Would you take that?
Okay. And when you do, once reject this revelation of God to man, the kingdom of heaven shall be given to other peoples, to those who will receive it with joy and gladness. In the name of the Father who sent me, I solemnly warn you that you are about to lose your position in the world as the standard bearers of eternal truth and the custodians of the divine law. I am just now offering you your last chance to come forward and repent, to signify your intention to seek God with all your hearts and to enter like little children and by sincere faith into the security and salvation of the kingdom of heaven.
Now, y'all think about this. At this point, the Jewish leaders could have stopped everything that was going on and said, wait, we want to still be the bearers of the divine law. We want to still be the torch for God, right? And that moment in time would have changed everything that came after this moment, right? So it's at this moment that Jesus is saying, you can decide right now to follow God and follow me. Everything would have changed at that moment, but they chose not to, right? So this is what comes next.
Roger.
Yes.
And Lucifer had nothing to do with their decision.
Nothing whatsoever. This is the decisions of those who were present at the time, right? It wasn't an influence of the devil. It wasn't an influence of anything but their own minds. The question was what? Good and evil, right? You want an example of that? Think about World War II. What did we have? We had good against evil, right? It wasn't a question of religion. It wasn't a question of politics. It wasn't any of those. It was a question of good and evil, right? And that's what Jesus is talking about right here. All right. Millie, would you take the next one, please?
My Father has long worked for your salvation, and I came down to live among you and personally show you the way. Many of both the Jews and Samaritans, and even the Gentiles, have believed the gospel of the kingdom, but those who should be first to come forward and accept the light of the heavens have steadfastly refused to believe the revelation of the truth of God. God revealed in man, and man uplifted to God.
Can y'all see the parallel of this in the book? You know, it's the new revelation. So men can accept the light of the world, which is the new revelation, or they can refuse it and stay in ignorance, right?
So question, Roger.
Yes.
So what is he really trying to say here? What was his message? That would be the kingdom of heaven, the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man. Because when you think about it, the Jewish people, if we kind of walk in their shoes just for a mile, and we have some crazy nut who comes to us and says, you know, I'm the light of the world, are we going to believe him? No, of course not.
No.
So, you know, what was he trying to accomplish
But
in terms of...
The difference is, though, Tim, is he had given them enough examples to verify that he was who he said he was.
Correct.
You know, by healing the sick, bringing the dead back to life, making people blind see again. All these things were the preamble to him, to those who did not believe he was who he was. It was living proof that he was who he was, right?
Right.
And even more, after the crucifixion, the resurrection even more shows that he says he was who he was, he is, you know? All right.
Well, one other thing here, though, is what they really refused to listen to was the fact that we are all sons of God. Every human being is a son of the Heavenly Father.
Yeah.
And they really did not like that because that would include the Gentiles and other people.
That's right. That includes the Samaritans, the Gentiles, all people, right?
Well, it's the same thing as modern day Christianity feels.
That's right.
That you've got to be born again with Jesus in your heart. And if you're not, then you're not going to go to heaven. You're not part of the bandwagon.
That's right.
You're not a son of God.
That's right. That's exactly what we're dealing with today. back then is whether you were a Jew or not, right? Now, to us, it's whether you're a dipped in the blood Christian. That's what they're talking about here, what he's talking about here, right?
Exactly. If you're not dipped in the blood,
That's right.
You're not a son of God.
That's
So
right.
he came down from heaven to reveal the Father, which was the very character and personality that was seen in him,
Right.
to provide a better way and to pretty much lead people into the kingdom of heaven, which would be the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man, which the Jews rejected.
That's right. That's right. That's exactly right. You've got it right on him. And that's why he says here, my Father has long worked for your salvation, and I came down to live among you and personally show you the way, right? He didn't, God didn't just say, this is the way. He actually sent his son to show us the way, right? And then because
salvation was based upon works to the Jewish people.
That's right.
Versus
and
simple
sacrifice. Remember,
correct.
The Jewish people believed in the sacrifice too. And this person comes along and says, no sacrifice is necessary. The only thing you need to get into heaven is faith, right? Your belief in God the Father and your belief that you are our Son of God and brothers to all mankind, right? Very simple concept. It was almost so simple they couldn't understand it.
It's really not that simple even today, because a lot of people even today say, no, you have to have a sacrificial lamb if you want salvation, which is totally false.
Yeah, and that's why they say it can't be that easy. We need a sacrifice, right? Look at the Maya civilization. The whole entire Mayan civilization killed their whole population because they believed they had to have a human sacrifice, right? For everything, for the rain, to grow crops, to do anything, right? All right, well, let's go on before we get.
That goes carries on forth from 200,000 years of darkness, where in order to buy the separation back into the goodwill of God, the people between 200,000 years ago and the time of Melchizedek formed a religion that you had to buy your way back into God's good graces by all of the sacrifices, human sacrifices, and then later on animal sacrifices.
Well, that was, remember now, what we're talking about today in this speech is that wasn't the problem with the Jewish Sanhedrin, right, and the Pharisees. Mm-hmm. The problem with them was they saw a loss of their livelihood, a loss of their profits, because if the world was like Jesus taught, then they were not necessary as leaders anymore, and they wouldn't make money anymore, would they? So
exactly,
that's the thing that really scared them. Okay, let's move on here to the next one. I want to make sure.
See, they didn't even believe their own book, where it says in Psalm 139 that we are all sons and daughters of God.
Right, I know. Stephen, would you take the next one, please?
All right. This afternoon, my apostles stand here before you in silence, but you shall soon hear their voices ringing out with the call to salvation and with the urge to unite with the heavenly kingdom as the sons of the living God. And now I call to witness these, my disciples and believers in the gospel of the kingdom, as well as the unseen messengers by their sides, that I have once more offered Israel and her rulers deliverance and salvation. But you all behold how the Father's mercy is slighted, how the messengers of truth are rejected. Nevertheless, I admonish you that these scribes and Pharisees still sit in Moses' seat, and therefore, until the Most Highs who rule in the kingdoms of men shall finally overthrow this nation and destroy the place of these rulers, I bid you cooperate with these elders of Israel. You are not required to unite with them in their plans to destroy the Son of Man, but in everything related to the peace of Israel, you are to be subject to them. In all these matters, do whatsoever they bid you, and observe the essentials of the law, but do not pattern after their evil works. Remember, this is the sin of these rulers. They say that which is good, but they do it not. You will know how these leaders bind heavy burdens on your shoulders, burdens grievous to bear, and that they will not lift as much as one finger to help you bear these weighty burdens. They have oppressed you with ceremonies and enslaved you by traditions.
Okay, so Jesus is trying to tell the populace that he is not inciting what? Insurrection. Because if they did that, what would happen? The Romans would come down and wipe them out, basically, because they were powerful enough to do that, right? So he's telling them to do what they say until the Most High's, which is the Verandadek's sons, decide what shall become of the Jewish nation. And that happened, what, 40 years after Jesus died. All of Jerusalem was wiped out, if y'all remember.
Hey,
Okay.
Question, Roger.
Yeah.
What does it mean when they say the Most Highs who rule in the kingdoms of men?
They're talking about the Verandadek sons of the constellation. They have the last say about what happens in the rule of men, and they have that say through whom? They have it through the system sovereigns and the planetary princes. That's how they rule in the kingdoms of men, is those two beings, right? And that's why we're supposed to follow them until those leaders go into rebellion like ours did, right? So immediately, our leader went from being Calagasta to whom? The 12 Melchizedeks, right?
Right.
Until the death of Jesus, and then our leader really is the vicegerent of this planet, which is Maccaventia Melchizedek, who Jesus assigned in that position. Now, he hasn't taken over that position because they're still rotating the control of the planet through the 24 elders at this time. And they may continue doing that for another 10,000 years. We don't know. But at some point, Maccaventia Melchizedek will step up and take control of the planet as the sovereign. Right?
You know, when I see that, when it says rule in the kingdoms, I always think of the council of men, you know, kind of like the 7 adjunct mind spirits where they do have that. Right, those little presence circuits.
Yeah.
For more info, you can read paper 35.
Yeah, the thing of it is, though, that's not really how they rule. They mean literally rule in the kingdoms of men through the invisible forces, the planetary princes, and those assigned, the archangels and that sort of thing.
Oh, that was well said. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's what I was asking.
Yeah.
How they ruled.
Yeah, they rule in the kingdoms of men. We are of a misunderstanding, and we think we rule our own planet, right? Through our governments. Our governments really have a sickness. Okay, they're ate up with profit and money instead of being ate up with the goodwill of the human race, right? So until they turn around and they become sensible to the brotherhood of man, will always think that they're ruling the planet, but we're in the background, though. Those who are ruling the planet are the celestial beings, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're just letting us think that we rule the planet, you know?
Yeah, they still believe we're the center of the universe.
That's right. That's right. Okay.
Yeah.
And then the last sentence of this paragraph I want to mention too, and they have oppressed you with ceremonies and enslaved you by traditions. Can you see any difference in that in the way the churches are trying to do right now? I can't.
That's right.
You know, I really can't. That freedom of religion is still way out there for us to discover, right? Mm-hmm. All right. Bill, I think you're up next.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to say that that goes like what we were talking about this afternoon, Roger, in paper 93. That about the return of Melchizedek and the Trinity teacher sons and stuff like that. So,
right.
You know, that could be.
When those sons, Yeah, when those sons come to earth, when the Trinity teacher sons or the magisterial sons, they literally will rule the planet. Right. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Okay. Furthermore, these self-centered rulers delight in doing their good works so that they will be seen by men. They make broad their phylacteries and enlarge the border of their official robes. They crave the chief places at all the feasts and demand the chief seats in the synagogue. They covet laudatory salutations in the marketplaces and desire to be called rabbi by all men. And even while they seek all this honor from men, they secretly lay hold of widows' houses and take profit from the services of the sacred temple. For a pretense, these hypocrites make long prayers in public and give alms to attract the notice of their fellows.
Well, he's calling an ace in these, isn't he? Okay.
Yeah.
He gets down to yeah, he gets down to business. Rodney, would you take the next one?
While you should honor your rulers and reverence your teachers, you should call no man father in the spiritual sense. For there is one who is your Father, even God. Neither should you seek to lord it over your brethren in the kingdom. Remember, I have taught you that he who would be greatest among you should become the server of all. If you presume to exalt yourselves before God, you will certainly be humbled. But whoso truly humbles himself will surely be exalted. Seek in your daily lives not self-gratification, but the glory of God. Intelligently subordinate your own wills to the will of the Father in heaven.
Let me make one correction. It says self-glorification, not gratification. Of course, both of those work.
Hey, Roger, I had a question.
Yes.
What does it mean when he says, truly, whoever humbles himself shall be exalted?
Well, those who become the servants of all are the ones that will be exalted in the mansion worlds, right?
What does exalted mean? Honored?
That means be of higher standing in the mansion worlds. If you want to become a teacher in the mansion world and lead men to more understanding of God the Father, you must learn how to be a servant in this world to your brothers and sisters, so you can prepare yourself for the teacher role, right? Because a teacher role has to be a humble role. If you do that for self-gratification, you're teaching for the wrong reason, right? Teaching is something you do so that you can help your brothers and sisters grow. That's what it's all about, right? Not because, so you can be great and pat yourself on the back and say, look how many things I've taught, right? That's got nothing to do with it, right? It's all about what your brothers and sisters learn and how they progress in their daily lives, right? Okay. Let's see. All right. Tim, would you take the next one, please?
Mistake not my words. I bear no malice toward these chief priests and rulers who, even now, seek my destruction. I have no ill will for these scribes and Pharisees who reject my teachings. I know that many of you believe in secret, and I know you will openly profess your allegiance to the kingdom when my hour comes. But how will your rabbis justify themselves, since they profess to talk with God and then presume to reject and destroy him who comes to reveal the Father to the worlds?
Good question, right? You can't be on two horses at the same time, right? All right. I'll take the next one. Woe upon you, scribes and Pharisee hypocrites! You would shut the doors of the kingdom of heaven against sincere men because they happen to be unlearned in their ways of your teaching. You refuse to enter the kingdom, and at the same time, you do everything within your power to prevent all others from entering. You stand with your backs to the doors of salvation and fight with all who would enter there with. So they try to block you entering into the kingdom of heaven, right? That's why he says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, right? All right, Diane.
Woe upon you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites that you are, for you do indeed encompass land and sea to make one
Proselyte.
And when you have succeeded, you are not content until you have made him twofold worse than he was as a child of the heathen.
So you put him in a worse situation than he was to start out with, right?
John 3:19 and 20 in action.
Yeah.
What's a proselyte?
Somebody who follows after you is
Okay.
a proselyte. Millie, would you take the next one?
Woe to you, chief priests and rulers, who lay hold of the property of the poor and demand heavy dues of those who would serve God as they think Moses ordained. You who refuse to show mercy, can you hope for mercy in the worlds to come?
The amount of mercy you give out is the amount of mercy you receive, right? We've been taught that. Okay. Stephen, would you take the next one?
Okay. Woe upon you, false teachers, blind guides. What can be expected of a nation when the blind lead the blind? They both shall stumble into the pit of destruction.
Boy, we've seen that in our own life, haven't we? And our own leaders, right?
Yep.
All right. Bill, would you take the next one?
Okay. Woe upon you who dissimulate when you take an oath. You are tricksters, since you teach that a man may swear by the temple and break his oath, but that whoso swears by the gold in the temple must remain bound. You are all fools and blind. You are not even consistent in your dishonesty. For which is the greater, the gold or the temple, which has supposedly sanctified the gold? You also teach that if a man swears by the altar, it is nothing, but that if one swears by the gift that is upon the altar, then shall he be held as a debtor. Again, are you blind to the truth? For which is the greater, the gift or the altar, which sanctifies the gift? How can you justify such hypocrisy and dishonesty in the sight of the God of heaven?
Because it works for them, right? They make a profit off of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's all about the profit. Rodney, would you take the next one?
Woe upon you, scribes and Pharisees, and all other hypocrites who make sure that they tithe mint, anise, and cumin, and at the same time disregard the weightier matters of the law, faith, mercy, and judgment. Within reason, the one you ought to have done, but not to have left the other undone. You are truly blind guides and dumb teachers. You strain out the gnat and swallow the camel.
I told you he laid it to him in this, didn't he?
He didn't mince words.
He didn't mince words at all. All right. Tim, would you take the next one?
Woe upon you, scribes and Pharisees! and
That was very good. Tim.
That's pretty good.
For you are scrupulous to cleanse the outside of the cup and the platter, but within there remains the filth of extortion, excesses, and deception. You are spiritually blind, and do you not recognize how much better it would be first to cleanse the inside of the cup, and then that which spills over would of itself cleanse the outside? You wicked retrobrates, you make the outward performances of your religion to conform with the letter of your interpretation of Moses' law, while your souls are steeped in iniquity, and filled with murder.
Laid it to him. I'm telling you. Every time I read this paper, I go, boy.
You didn't read it like he did, though.
Yeah.
That's really good, too.
Right. Woe upon all who reject truth and spurn mercy. Many of you are like white sepulchres, which outwardly appear beautiful, but within are full of dead men's bones and all sorts of uncleanliness. Even so, do you not, who knowingly reject the counsel of God, appear outwardly to men as holy and righteous, but inwardly your hearts are filled with hypocrisy and iniquity.
Yep.
And he would know, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Woe upon you, false gods of a nation. Over yonder have you built a monument to the martyred prophets of old, while you plot to destroy him of whom they spoke. You garnish the tombs of the righteous and flatter yourselves that had you lived in the days of your fathers, you would not have killed the prophets. And then in the face of such self-righteous thinking, you make ready to slay him of whom the prophets spoke, the Son of Man. Inasmuch as you do these things, are you witness to yourselves that you are the wicked sons of them who slew the prophets? Go on then and fill up the cup of your condemnation to the full.
Calling them exactly what they are, didn't he?
Yep.
Millie, would you take the next one?
Woe upon you, children of evil. John did truly call you the offspring of vipers, and I ask how you can escape the judgment that John pronounced on you.
Mm-hmm.
Stephen.
But even now I offer you in my Father's name mercy and forgiveness. Even now I proffer the loving hand of eternal fellowship. My Father has sent you the wise men and the prophets. Some of you have persecuted and others you have killed. Then appeared John, proclaiming the coming of the Son of Man, and him you destroyed, after many had believed his teaching. And now you make ready to shed more innocent blood. Do you not comprehend that a terrible day of reckoning will come, when the judge of all the earth shall require of this people an accounting for the way they have rejected, persecuted, and destroyed these messengers of heaven? Do you not understand that you must account for all of this righteous blood, from the first prophet killed down to the time of Zechariah, who was slain between the sanctuary and the altar? And if you go on in your evil ways, this accounting may be required of this very generation.
Yep.
Judgment is coming, right?
Mm-hmm.
Bill.
O Jerusalem, and the children of Abraham, you who have stoned the prophets and killed the teachers that were sent to you. Even now would I gather your children together, as a hen gathers her chickens under her wing, but you will not.
So we have our Lord God aching for his own children to come home, right?
That's right.
All right. Rodney.
And now I take leave of you. You have heard my message and have made your decision. Those who have believed my gospel are even now safe within the kingdom of God. To you who have chosen to reject the gift of God, I say that you will no more see me teaching in the temple. My work for you is done. Behold, I go forth with my children, and your house is left to you desolate.
Man.
Mm-hmm.
Tim, would you take the last sentence there?
And then the master beckoned his followers to depart from the temple.
And that's the last time he taught in the temple, right? Now, this is interesting, this next section. You know, it's two short sections here. This next section goes out of its ways because of Jesus's rebuke at the temple, right? It goes out of its way after that rebuke to give us the status of the individual Jews. And this is because the revelators do not want us to take away an attitude of hate for the Jews, right? That they are still children of God and that we have to respect them as brothers and sisters still, even after what happened at the crucifixion. All right? So let's start on this. Status of the individual Jews. The fact that the spiritual leaders and the religious teachers of the Jewish nation one time rejected the teachings of Jesus and conspired to bring about his cruel death does not in any manner affect the status of any individual Jew in his standing before God. Right? It should not because those who profess to be followers of the Christ to be prejudiced against the Jews as fellow mortals. It says that plainly, right? The Jew as a nation and as a social political group paid in full the terrible price of rejecting the Prince of Peace. And we know that the all of Jerusalem was wiped out, right? Long since they ceased to be the spiritual torchbearers of divine truth to the races of mankind. But this constitutes no valid reason why the individual descendants of these long ago Jews should be made to suffer for the persecutions which have been visited upon them by intolerant, unworthy, and bigoted professed followers of Jesus of Nazareth, who was himself a Jew by natural birth, right? So basically, it gives us no, that changed itself. It gives us no reason for prejudice against the Jews, right? All right.
Right.
Let's see here. Let's go on. Diane?
Many times has the unreasoning and unchristlike hatred and persecution of modern Jews terminated in the suffering and death of some innocent and unfolding Jewish individual whose very ancestors, in the times of Jesus, heartily accepted his gospel and presently died unflinchingly for that truth, which they so wholeheartedly believed. What a shudder of horror passes over the onlooking celestial beings as they behold the professed followers of Jesus indulge themselves in persecuting, harassing, and even murdering the latter-day descendants of Peter, Philip, Matthew, and others of the Palestinian Jews, who so gloriously yielded up their lives as the first martyrs of the gospel of the heavenly kingdom.
Remember, six of the apostles were crucified, and they were Jews, right? Okay, so they laid down their own life for the kingdom, right? And many other martyrs during that period of time. All right. Millie, would you take the next one?
How cruel and unreasoning to compel innocent children to suffer for the sins of their progenitors, misdeeds of which they are wholly ignorant, and for which they could in no way be responsible. And to do such wicked deeds in the name of one who taught his disciples to love even their enemies, it has become necessary in this recital of the life of Jesus to portray the manner in which certain of his fellow Jews rejected him and conspired to bring about his ignominious death. But we would warn all who read this narrative that the presentation of such a historical recital in no way justifies the unjust hatred nor condones the unfair attitude of mind which so many professed Christians have maintained toward individual Jews for many centuries. Kingdom believers, those who follow the teachings of Jesus, must cease to mistreat the individual Jew as one who is guilty of the rejection and crucifixion of Jesus. The Father and his Creator Son have never ceased to love the Jews. God is no respecter of persons, and salvation is for the Jews as well as for the Gentile.
So they are children of God just as we are children of God, right?
Right.
All right.
Right.
Stephen, would you take the next one? It shuffled my people up here.
Okay. The fateful Sanhedrin meeting. Move this around a little bit. Okay. At 8 o'clock on this Tuesday evening, the faithful meeting of the Sanhedrin was called to order. On many previous occasions had this Supreme Court of the Jewish nation informally decreed the death of Jesus. Many times had this august ruling body determined to put a stop to his work, but never before had they resolved to place him under arrest and to bring about his death and any and all costs, at any and all costs. It was just before midnight on this Tuesday, April 4th, AD 30, that the Sanhedrin, as then constituted, officially and unanimously voted to impose the death sentence upon both Jesus and Lazarus. This was the answer to the Master's last appeal to the rulers of the Jews, which he had made in the temple only a few hours before. And it represented their reaction of bitter resentment towards Jesus. Last and vigorous indictment of these same chief priests and impotent Sadducees and Pharisees. The passing of the death sentence, even before his trial, upon the Son of God, was the Sanhedrin's reply to the last offer of heavenly mercy, even to be extended to the Jewish nation as such.
Okay, so they outright rejected the offer of God, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Bill, would you take the next one, please?
Okay. From this time on, the Jews were left to finish their brief and short leash of national life wholly in accordance with their purely human status among the nations of Urantia. Israel had repudiated the Son of God who made a covenant with Abraham and the plan to make the children of Abraham the light bearers of truth to the world had been shattered. The divine covenant had been abrogated, and the end of the Hebrew nation drew on apace.
Don't you know that if Abraham could watch this, that he would have been appalled at what happened? Right?
Yeah.
All right. Tim, would you take the next one?
Okay. And just one question. When they say the Son of
Oh, I
God,
skipped over Rodney. Go ahead with your question. Then
when they say the Son of God, are they referring to Jesus or Melchizedek?
they're talking about Jesus.
Okay.
Rodney, you want to take the next one, then Tim can take the one after that.
The officers of the Sanhedrin were given the orders for Jesus' arrest early the next morning, but with instructions that he must not be apprehended in public. They were told to plan to take him in secret, preferably suddenly and at night, understanding that he might not return that day, Wednesday, to teach in the temple. They instructed these officers of the Sanhedrin to, quote, bring him before the high Jewish court sometime before midnight on Thursday.
So what they were doing is dark, and they were going to do it in the dark, weren't they?
Yeah.
All right. Tim, would you take the next one, please?
Section 4, the situation in Jerusalem. At the conclusion of Jesus' last discourse in the temple, the apostles once more were left in confusion and consternation.
Right.
Before the Master began his terrible denunciation of the Jewish rulers, Judas had returned to the temple, so that all 12 heard this later half of Jesus' last discourse in the temple. It is unfortunate that Judas Iscariot could not have heard the first and mercy-proffering half of this farewell address. He did not hear this last offer of mercy to the Jewish rulers because he was still in conference with a certain group of Sanhedrians?
Sadducean.
Oh, Sadducean relatives and friends with whom he had lunched and with whom he was conferring as to the most fitting manner of disassociating himself from Jesus and his fellow apostles. It was while listening to the Master's final indictment of the Jewish leaders and rulers that Judas finally and fully made up his mind to forsake the gospel movement and wash his hands of the whole enterprise. Nevertheless, he left the temple and company with the 12, went with them to Mount Olivet, where his fellow apostles he listened to that fateful discourse on the destruction of Jerusalem and the end of the Jewish nation, and remained with them at that Tuesday night at the new camp near Gethsemane.
So he had heard the last half of it, but not the first half, right? All right.
Right.
The multitude who heard Jesus swing from his merciful appeal to the Jewish leaders into that sudden and scathing rebuke which bordered on ruthless denunciation were stunned and bewildered. That night, while the Sanhedrin sat in death judgment upon Jesus, and while the Master sat with his apostles and certain of his disciples out on the Mount of Olives, foretelling the death of the Jewish nation, all Jerusalem was given over to the serious and suppressed discussion of just one question: what will they do with Jesus?
Mm-hmm.
At the home of Nicodemus, more than 30 prominent Jews who were secret believers in the kingdom met and debated what course they would pursue in case an open break with the Sanhedrin should come. All present agreed that they would make open acknowledgement of their allegiance to the Master in the very hour they should hear of his arrest. And that is just what they did.
All right, so 30 of the Sanhedrin converted to believers. Millie, would you take the next one?
The Sadducees, who now controlled and dominated the Sanhedrin, were desirous of making away with Jesus for the following reasons. One, they feared the increased popular favor with which the multitude regarded him, and they thought it threatened to endanger the existence of the Jewish nation by possible involvement with the Roman authorities. Number two, his zeal for temple reform struck directly at their revenues. We talked about this.
Yeah.
The cleansing of the temple affected their pocketbooks.
Yeah.
And three, they felt themselves responsible for the preservation of social order, and they feared the consequences of the further spread of Jesus' strange and new doctrine of the brotherhood of man.
Yeah, they wouldn't be in control of that anymore, would they? All right.
That's right.
Okay. Rodney, would you take the next one? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm out of order again. Stephen, would you take the next one?
Okay. The Pharisees had different motives for wanting to see Jesus put to death. They feared him because, one, he was arrayed in telling opposition to their traditional hold upon the people. The Pharisees were ultra-conservative, and they bitterly resented the supposedly radical attacks upon their vested prestige as religious teachers. Two, they held that Jesus was a lawbreaker, that he had shown utter disregard for the Sabbath and numerous other legal and ceremonial requirements. Three, they charged him with blasphemy because he alluded to God as his Father. Four, and now were they thoroughly angry with him because his last discourse of bitter denunciation, which he had this day delivered in the temple as the concluding portion of his farewell address.
That's pretty right on the money, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
All right. Bill, would you take the next one?
Yeah. And that, that was that number 3 statement on that last slide was another denunciation of their own writing.
Yeah, that's right.
About the fatherhood of God.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They didn't even believe their own stuff.
Yeah, that's right.
The Sanhedrin having formally decreed the death of Jesus and having issued orders for his arrest, adjourned on this Tuesday near midnight. After appointing to meet at 10 o'clock the next morning at the home of Caiaphas, the high priest, for the purpose of formulating the charges on which Jesus should be brought to trial.
A lot of planning went into this, didn't it? All right.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Roger, I believe you're next.
A small group of the Sadducees had actually proposed to dispose of Jesus by assassination, but the Pharisees utterly refused to countenance such a procedure.
So they even talked about assassinating him, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Tim, would you take this one?
And this was the situation in Jerusalem and among men on this eventful day, while a vast concourse of celestial beings hovered over this momentous scene on earth, anxious to do something to assist their beloved sovereign, but powerless to act because they were effectively restrained by their commanding superiors.
So we got to remember that there's a whole host of celestial beings assigned to this planet at all times, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that they were watching what was going on during this whole thing. So they wanted to pitch in and do something, but they were not allowed to do so, right?
Who do you think the superiors were? The Ancients of Days, or?
No, the superiors were the controlling factors of the planet, the heads like the Melchizedeks, and that sort of thing. They had last say. And of course, the angels, the heads of the angels would be the captains of the angels squads, and of course the archangels, right? They had the last say on the planet. And since we have a archangel, what would you call it, a station here on the planet, we know that it has lots of archangels on it. So, so that's pretty.
Also, the midwayers who were in attendance watching all of this to be able to record this.
Yeah.
They were astounded at this thing too.
Yeah, and remember the midwayers were the ones who could have physically done something if they were allowed to do so, right?
Right.
So there's a lot to it. Let's go ahead and say a closing prayer, and then I'll stop the recording for a minute. Dear, you want to pray for us?
Heavenly Father, Mother God, we thank you for this information in this paper, as difficult as it is for us to deal with and having to have dealt with it before. It brings up new issues and old issues, and we are grateful that we are students of the Urantia Book, of this revelation given to us. And we ask that you continue to be with us and help us to grow and understand and teach the work that's been blessed by you in these papers, so that we may be witness to it and teachers to others. We just thank you for this opportunity to come together to read and study. And we thank you for all of our Jewish brothers and sisters. We know that many of them are teaching the Jewish God of Israel, and that have converted and have their own understanding. And we are so grateful to know some of these people and have them be part of our lives. Just thank you for everything. Thank you for blessing us. Thank you for being with us. And we thank you for everything. In your name, Jesus, Christ Michael of Lebanon, our friend and our brother.
Amen.
Mm.
Thank you for joining us.